Hi, everybody. You're here at Inclusion Live, the Best is Leadership podcast. And this is where we talk to our exec friends, exec leaders, CEOs, and ask them to share with us their unfiltered journeys around leadership and what they've really noticed for themselves that makes the biggest difference for success. I'm joined by David Prager. He is a fantastic leader that I've had the privilege of working with on a number of occasions in his prior role as Chief Brand Officer for De Beers Group. David and I have collaborated quite often around leadership and in particular inclusion. And today we're going to be exploring his views. So without more ado, I'm going to hand over to David. Please, David, welcome. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about you?
Thanks, Esther. Great to see you. As you said, I was at De Beers for, a long time, about 18 years before I left a few months ago. As you know, Esther, people can hear from my accent. I live in London, and I've lived in London for more than 20 years, but I'm originally from New York, so I've got some muddled accent somewhere in the mid-Atlantic region. But I think that kind of background has helped me, particularly as we talk about inclusion. I've always felt a bit like an outsider wherever I am, and I think that's helped give me a little bit of a perspective of what it must be like joining large organizations, complex organizations from the outside.
But that's a great place to dive into. So, we're interested in your experiences of leadership, and in particular, it might be we move into mentoring as well, because I know you've been very passionate around that. So let's maybe unpack what you just said. Being an outsider, what does that mean for you when you think about leadership?
Well, leadership, in the end it's a big word, but it boils down to a few things. It boils down to, do you have a vision of where you want to take a team or an organization? Do you have curiosity and interest in learning all that's required to get you there? Are you a human? Can you relate to people and lead people and care about people? And I don't think you can do any of those things, or at least do them well, do them to level required, unless you are willing to seek out diverse views, unless you're looking for diverse opinions intentionally. And, there's a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the news right now. It is, for some reason, I'm not quite sure why, a controversial topic, but I think of it as a very self-interested topic. My view is I'm better. I'm better as a leader. The organization I work for, the team I'm trying to lead, is better if I've got people who have experienced more things, who know things I don't know, and have contributions to make that I couldn't possibly give. That's going to make us better and make me personally, hopefully, more successful. And so that's why that's, to me, what leadership is all about, and why diversity and inclusion is such a core part of being a good leader.
I think that's a really interesting take, because actually when we think about leadership, we do think about ourselves and what we need. And one of the things we explore in some of our programs is how often do we think about what our people need? And that's where inclusion really brings that balance into it. So how about mentoring? Where are you at with the topic of mentoring? Because obviously we've worked together on that a few times.
Yeah, and Esther, you've led teams I've worked with in what we call reciprocal mentoring. That is this idea that it's not just the person with the senior title that's mentoring somebody with a junior title, but that there is something to be learned from a two-way relationship. And I've had the privilege of being in reciprocal mentoring relationships with people from different parts of the world and in different fields, in South Africa, in Botswana, people in the United States, in the UK, in Canada. And it's been fascinating to me, because I'm obviously able to contribute my experience to them as they rise up in an organization and try to navigate not just things we would all confront, like how to learn a new skill or how to balance your work and your life, but also I think some of the nuanced gray area that's not talked. How do you navigate politics? How do you work with a manager that you're not seeing eye to eye to? How do you build coalitions in a team? And being able to share some of those concepts with people has been really rewarding. But more rewarding in the reciprocal mentoring relationship has been what I've gotten back. And that is an understanding of what it's like coming into an organization as a junior person, coming in out of university, coming in as a tradesperson who doesn't necessarily have a voice or access at the top table of the organization, but still has something really important to say. And more often than not, the contributions I've made at the top table into the culture of the business, how we're serving our employees, has originated from insights I've gained from those reciprocal mentoring relationships. And it wouldn't have been possible had those relationships not been established.
You're really showing the richness of the dividend for everybody involved in it. Mentoring takes many forms, but most traditionally we think about a senior leader helping someone that's more junior to themselves. And actually, you're describing there the reverse is true. So why do you think mentoring is such an important thing for people around the executive table? Because typically you're very busy, time poor, and with many priorities. So why did it matter so much for you?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it only matters if you take it seriously, right?
Mm.
So if it's the meeting that keeps getting pushed off in the diary, if you shave 5 minutes off before it and 5 minutes off at the end of it, and you don't give it the preparation required, frankly, you're not going to get much out of it. So you have to value it as a really important contributor to your, not just the development of others, but your own understanding of your role in the organization and how you can make it better. And as I said at the beginning of our conversation, leadership requires curiosity, requires humanity, requires a vision that can pull people together. How you can possibly have those things, do them well without real insight from the people in the organization who are at the other end of that vision, who have something to share to satiate your curiosity, who are human with whom you need to learn from. You can't be an effective leader without honing those skills in direct engagement with your people.
You're making me think about some conversations I might have with leaders that talk about performance, and they look at it through the performance lens. And actually, human engagement and connection is the gateway to performance. And
Right.
so, what you're saying is you put that front and center. It's actually how you are going to be approaching it.
And look, so you send a big message to the organization when you're in particularly a reciprocal mentoring relationship, and well, not just I'm doing it, but in our case, every other colleague on the De Beers executive committee was doing it. It says what? It says we care about learning and listening to what you have to say, that you have something important to share, you make a valuable contribution to the organization, and our ability to make decisions on the direction and future of where the business will go and where you will take it has to be tied to listening to understand what people in the organization are saying to us, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of, what they believe in. It's essential if you're going to be a serious leadership team.
So maybe let's take a moment and think about the impact that you've seen coming through it, maybe through the people lens when you're having those conversations around the table together. What do you think has made it, worthwhile, and what lessons or learnings would you share to the leaders listening to this about what they could do to make a difference?
Well, I think first of all and fundamentally, it has an impact on the individual. So I talked about how it's had an impact on me. I think I'm right in saying that the people with whom I've had those reciprocal mentoring relationships also feel valued. They feel like they've been listened to and that their voice is being heard. And by the way, when I say their voice is being heard, it might sound like their criticism is being heard. No, sometimes it's great ideas. Sometimes it's really positive feedback for the organization to build on. So this is not a kind of binary, all is bad and we need to listen kind of situation. So I think there's real value for that individual. And then for the organization, if I'm effective, part of the mentoring relationship in building the success of an organization is obviously having that one-on-one engagement and hopefully giving good advice. I mean, I always say mentoring, you're not problem solving. You are helping the person solve their own problem. And the same is true for me if it's reciprocal mentoring this way. That's only part of the story. The other half is making sure that you're taking those learnings and bringing them back to in whatever leadership team you're on, and compiling that with the other insights your colleagues have gotten from their mentoring relationships. And by the way, these can be formal relationships where you're taking notes and you're minuting your meetings, or it can be much more casual relationships where you're getting insights. But if you as a leadership team can compile those insights and think critically about them and interrogate them and use them as the insights for discussions that lead you to better outcomes for the organization. I've seen it have really important impact. And for De Beers' case, De Beers took a remarkable journey. You know, in 2016, I might get my date wrong, 2016, 2017, it was clear to us, in part from the conversations we were having, that there was not enough diverse representation in the leadership of the organization. And so part of that was putting through the systems and processes that helped us create greater exposure for people that would not otherwise have been exposed to leadership positions. But part of it was really listening to what people were telling us about the barriers to upward mobility. And the more we listened to them, they were coming up with things that we couldn't have possibly known ourselves, that we were not experiencing. And the more we listened to them, the more we were able to work to remove those barriers, some real barriers, some artificial barriers, but remove them, show them they were being removed, so people felt there was a better chance to get ahead. And you know, the success and the numbers speak for themselves over time.
You're absolutely spot on with the date, actually, because I was part of that. I was
Right.
having those conversations in 2016 with your people. And it has been a transformative process, actually. And I think we're fast forwarding 9 years now, but you really have seen the journey. And actually, you just reminded me around the importance of the simplicity of conversations. Conversations just unlock so much, and it is the foundation of great leadership. So,
Yeah, where I've seen people get very, very nervous or uncomfortable or unworthy of the big word mentorship is when they think it's this grand thing, and they're somehow meant to have really wise insights, like some philosopher. And if they're not able to impart those in every conversation, they're somehow failing their partner. And that I can tell you from somebody that rarely has a wise insight, that's definitely not the case. You know, it is the conversation. It is not the light bulb moment where you help with an insight that helps people see through the clouds. It's the conversation, it's the listening, it's the working things through, and it's the asking questions. You know, why do you think that? How do you think that? How else could you have approached that situation? You think this person thinks that? Are you sure this person thinks that? And helping the person take a step back and interrogate those things for themselves is helpful. And that's also more revealing than anything I could say. And there are some ingredients for good mentorship, and it starts ultimately with trust, right? Particularly when it's in the same organization and there's a junior senior pairing. The junior person in particular has to have trust that they can share candidly their thoughts in a kind of private context, but also the senior person has to have that as well, because the senior person has to be able to share and complain, and the more you have those conversations over time, the more you see, I think, from my experience has been, the deeper the conversations get because you're building that trust.
Yeah. You bring me to psychological safety, which I think is a term that's becoming increasingly appreciated for what it brings to the quality of organizational, conversations and how we trust each other. And actually, how do you do that? So let's talk practically strategies. How do you bring trust when quite obviously you're at the very top of an organization and you're working with somebody who you've never met before, who both of you have said, look, hey, I want to do this mentoring program together. What would you say are the best strategies for leaders to deploy?
Well, the one thing I will tell you is I always chuckle when I'm sitting around a table and people say, in our organization, we have psychological safety. Or do we, or it's more rhetorical, do we have psychological safety in our organization? And I think to myself, well, you're going to get one of two answers. No, which tells you then there's probably more psychological safety than you think, or yes.
Yeah.
And the yes might be, yes, you actually do, or you definitely don't, because nobody's willing to say it. So, you have to do more digging to figure out whether people feel safe to share. And we should just, at least for me, define what we mean by psychological safety. In a purely business and commercial context, to me, it's I don't have to censor myself before I give an idea that I'm not totally convinced isn't going to make me look dumb. And because it might be a great idea too. And some people, I've seen some people confuse it with, well, you should be able to say anything you want in business or in a meeting, and you should be uncensored, and that's psychological safety. That's not it. You're a professional, you've got good ideas, you've got not so good ideas, and you've got to be intelligent about what you share and when. And that builds your reputation as a positive contributor or not to a team. But for somebody who has done the work, for somebody who has good insights, for somebody that has a good track record of contributing good ideas, I have seen them often not want to contribute an idea in a meeting because there's a sense, the calculus they do, and you can almost see them doing it if you can spot them in the meeting, is the benefit I'm going to get from having a good idea in this meeting is not as significant to me as the negative impact of getting it wrong. And that cost benefit analysis leads them to not contribute. Now, that leads them to not contribute. That's a loss for them. Fine. It's a loss for other people being able to see what they can do. And if they do it enough, frankly, that's a loss for their ability to move upward in an organization. But more importantly, you do it enough, it's detrimental to the business because the business isn't getting good ideas. The business isn't moving forward. And so the business, and when I say the business is just people, right?
Yeah.
Particularly the job of a leader is to make sure that they are pulling those ideas from people. They're creating an ecosystem in which that cost benefit analysis tells them, I'm going to contribute here. It's better for me, and the risk of contributing is really low. And how do you do that? It totally depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the meeting. It can be you role modeling behavior where you say, look, I've got an idea here. I don't think it's entirely cooked, but let me share it. And then we can build on it or not. But it demonstrates a willingness of the leader to put themselves out there. Frankly, if we're honest about it, it's easier for the leader to put themselves out there sometimes, but also sometimes it's harder because they've got more to lose. They're really worried. Every leader is still insecure. They don't want to look stupid in front of their team. So if you can role model that behavior, that's helpful. If you can tactfully pull people who you sense are holding back and get them to contribute in the meeting, that's helpful. I find following up with people that you felt held back and ask them what they thought after the meeting, and you discover they have an idea that was worth exploring, to really push them to contribute more in a meeting and even incorporate that more formally, more intentionally into a performance plan. It depends on the person, it depends on the situation, but the role of the leader is to see, in part, what contributions are being made to make the solution better in the meeting, and if contributions aren't being made, it's not the fault of the person not making it. It's because you as a leader haven't created the conditions in which they feel comfortable to do so.
I think that's absolutely terrific. So I'm almost poised to ask you another question. So that's almost the leader with their team. What's it felt like for you in those moments around the exec table, and how have you overcome those very natural challenges? Because we all have them. The tables are different, aren't they? So
Yeah.
share around that from you personally about what you've encountered and how you've faced into it.
Yeah, I'll tell you first maybe what I encountered, which was entirely self-imposed. I found that over time, in quite a complex organization, that I was working really hard to build bridges with other parts of the organization and create compromise so that we could get to solutions. Um, but and that that compromise is important, right? Particularly in a complex business that has to move fast.
Mm.
But it's not always the answer. And what I found was that in trying to get to the compromise, I was often avoiding the discussion, the debate, the argument that needed to happen that was more helpful to the organization. And by avoiding it, it wasn't going to go away. It was just going to come back 3 or 6 months later.
Mm.
And it was only after good feedback from peers and self-reflection that I understood that part of the value I brought to the organization was building coalitions and finding compromise. But part of the value I had to bring as well was having the argument, standing my ground, having a point of view, and really being forceful about getting it across. I find if you do that as well, and obviously you have to do it the right way and respectfully and with evidence and data, then you build a more trusted relationship with even the people that are disagreeing with you because they understand where you stand, they respect your approach, and ultimately that still leads you to a better outcome, whether it's a compromise or.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your candor on that, because actually you said you've had feedback. We've got to be open to feedback in the first place. It's not always easy, is it? But also that piece about reflection. And as you were talking, I was thinking sometimes it's about posing the right question to bring the challenge as well. It's not about failing to agree. It also is having the opportunity to pose the question that makes the conversation happen. So thank you for that. So I always like to close around a couple of strategies that you think would make the biggest difference for leaders in almost like taking control of their own leadership, taking feedback, mentoring for others, inclusion, which is where we started.
Well, I think I'll say two that, it's a work in progress, but these have served me well. And it's what I've learned over time. The first is move from being a problem solver to a problem helper, right?
Yeah.
And that means helping your people see the problem in front of them, ensure they have the tools to solve the problem, and then let them get on with it. Often the hardest thing to do, I think, in leadership is know the answer and not give it. Not in a masochistic way, not making people suffer, but understanding that no value has been created if you're giving the answer every time. Obviously, sometimes you have to. But if it's something that the person should figure out for themselves, can figure out for themselves, and will make them better, then it's your job as a leader to give them the space, the context, the resources for them to go and do that. So go from problem solver to problem helper. And then secondly, it's so obvious, so easy, but often forgotten is be human. Leadership of people, gets complicated because of the second part of that, people. Leadership would be a really easy thing if people weren't involved. But that's also where the fun is, of course. That's where the joy is. That's where you succeed together. And you cannot lead people effectively, I haven't experienced, without understanding their own circumstance, knowing a little bit about their lives, and genuinely caring about their success. Not fake caring, not management caring, but really caring. Thinking about their success when you wake up in the morning, and working for their success. That's the full-time job, working for your team's success. And then that will make you and the rest of the team in the organization ultimately successful in the end.
Fantastic. I mean, I couldn't think of a better close, actually. Thank you, David Prager. We've been thinking at Inclusion Live in our podcast, The Best is Leadership, how we bring the best out of people through mentoring, listening, putting people first, the human pieces.
Thank you, Esther.